apologized 37 times during dinner. Not because she'd done anything wrong, because somewhere along the way, someone had convinced her that existing too loudly, she didn't realize it then, but one sentence she'd hear 3 years later would completely undo everything she'd believed about herself. I'll tell you what that sentence was. First, you need to meet the man who taught her she was too much.
Hi, I'm Clara. Maybe you started apologizing for things that were never actually wrong. For crying, for asking a question twice, for needing reassurance more than once, not because those things were unreasonable, because somewhere along the way, you learned that needing anything at all came with a cost, and you decided it was safer to just need less. You've probably also gotten good at reading a room before you're even fully in it, sensing within seconds whether it's safe to be fully yourself or whether you need to dial something down before anyone notices. That kind of vigilance is exhausting, and it usually isn't something you were born with. It's something you learned from someone who made your normal amount of feeling seem like a problem to be managed. Maybe you've noticed it show up in small, specific ways. Laughing a little quieter than you actually want to, holding back an opinion you'd normally share, waiting to see how someone else reacts before deciding how much of your own excitement is allowed to show. That's not just personality. That's a learned habit of self-monitoring, built by someone who once made your full self feel unsafe to bring into the room. You might have also noticed it in how you handle conflict now, going quiet instead of saying what actually hurt, agreeing faster than you mean to keep the peace, telling yourself your reaction was probably an overreaction before anyone else even had the chance to say so. That habit of preemptively shrinking your own feelings didn't come from nowhere. It came from somewhere specific, and it's allowed to be unlearned. Maybe it shows up in dating. 2. Waiting exactly the right amount of time before replying so you don't seem too eager. Downplaying how much you liked a first date, just in case saying it out loud makes you sound naive or overly invested. Deciding in advance how many texts is too many, as if affection came with a hard limit you had to police in yourself before someone else could police it for you. Or maybe it shows up with friends, being the one who always asks, "How are you?" first, and rarely gets asked back, being the one who remembers everyone else's important dates while quietly wondering if anyone would remember yours. Being praised for being solo maintenance in a tone that made you realize, uncomfortably, that low maintenance had become the price of being kept around at all. None of that is really about you being difficult. It's about a pattern you built, brick by brick, out of a reasonable response to being told, at some point, that your normal amount of anything was somehow excessive. I want you to hear a few things tonight. Let them land, one at a time. You were not hard to love. You loved someone who didn't know how to stay. Being left or dismissed or made to feel like too much doesn't mean you were lacking. It means you were standing in front of someone who couldn't meet what you actually had to offer. You don't have to shrink yourself to make sense of why someone left, or pulled away, or made you feel small. Sometimes people leave for reasons that have nothing to do with your size. The right person was never going to need you to be smaller, quieter, or easier than you already are. If you're rebuilding your sense of worth right now, start here. You were worth choosing before whatever happened to you, and you're worth choosing after it too. You don't need anyone to come back and prove your value. Your value was never something they were holding for you in the first place. It was always yours, whether they recognized it or not. Because somewhere along the way, whatever story you've been telling yourself about why you weren't enough, it's time to consider that it was never true. Here's what I want you to sit with tonight. The people who called you too much were usually describing their own limits, not your actual size. A person with a wider capacity for love wouldn't have experienced the same you as overwhelming. They'd have simply met you there. That doesn't mean you have nothing to work on. Ever. Everyone does. But too much is rarely an honest description of a person. It's usually a description of someone else's ceiling, mistaken for your floor. Think about it this way. The same amount of feeling that one person calls too intense is exactly what another person calls finally. Someone who feels things as deeply as I do. The feelings didn't change. The container able to hold them did. Remembering. That's worth remembering the next time you catch yourself, assuming the problem was your volume rather than their capacity. You are allowed to take up the same space you took up before someone told you not to. Don't let one relationship, one comment, one disappointed sigh make you smaller than you actually are. You don't need them to come back and take it back for it to stop being true. Their opinion of your size was never actually a fact. It was just an opinion, delivered with enough conviction that you mistook it for one. I also want to say this gently. Unlearning the shrinking takes time, and you don't have to do it perfectly or all at once. You might still catch yourself editing a feeling down before you say it out loud, even after you've understood intellectually that you don't need to. That's normal. Old habits built out of self-protection don't dissolve the moment you understand where they came from. They fade slowly with practice, every time you choose to take up a little more space than the old habit would have allowed. One small practice worth trying, if it helps, the next time you catch yourself about to shrink something, a feeling, a need, an honest reaction, pause for just a second before you do it. Not to force yourself to say the full-sized version out loud if you're not ready. Just notice that you are about to edit yourself down and ask, quietly, whether this particular room actually required it, or whether you were just doing it out of old habit. Sometimes just noticing the reflex is enough to loosen its grip a little, so here's what I'll leave you with tonight. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to feel things fully, out loud, without editing them down first. You are allowed to be exactly as much as you are, and to go looking for people who don't experience that as a burden. That version of you was never the problem. You were just standing in the wrong room for a while. You're allowed to find a different one, and if tonight you're not quite ready to believe any of this fully, that's okay too. You don't have to believe it completely for it to start being true. Sometimes hearing it once is just the first small crack in a story you've been carrying for a long time. And that's enough for tonight. Let it be quiet now. Let it be finished. Good night. I'm glad you were here tonight.